Morgoth and Sauron are two of the main villainous figures in J.R.R. Tolkien's legendary works, more specifically in his works The Silmarillion and The Lord of the Rings. Morgoth, also called Melkor, is the great antagonist of the First Age of the world, while Sauron, his most powerful lieutenant, assumes the role of main villain in the Second and Third Ages. Both are agents of evil, but their natures, origins and modes of operation present significant differences. Let's explore them in detail. Sauron, one of the most feared and powerful characters in Tolkien's legend, he plays the role of the great villain in The Lord of the Rings and The Silmarillion. His origins date back to the creation of the world, and his rise to power is marked by the corruption, manipulation and domination of various races in Middle-earth. He is one of the greatest antagonists in Tolkien's legend, and his influence extends for thousands of years. Origin of Sauron. Sauron, whose original name was Mairon, the Brave, was one of the Maiar, spirits of great power who served the Vala, the gods of Middle-earth. As a Maya, Sauron was a being of a spiritual nature, endowed with great intelligence and skill. Initially, he was a loyal servant of all, the Vala of creation, craftsmanship and metallurgy, from whom Sauron learned the secrets of construction and manipulation of materials. He stood out for his ability to organize, build and bring order. Original name, like Mairon, he was admired for his ability to shape and build with perfection. His dedication to order and efficiency was remarkable, and he was considered one of the most powerful and skilled of the Maiar. Corruption by Morgoth. Sauron was eventually corrupted by Morgoth, Melkor, the most powerful of the Vala and the first great lord of evil in Middle-earth. Morgoth was one of the first beings to rebel against the designs of Eru Iluvatar, the creator, seeking to impose his own will on the world. Sauron was attracted by the promise of power and absolute control, and ended up becoming the most loyal and powerful of Morgoth's lieutenants. Submission to evil. Sauron was seduced by the idea of dominating and controlling things to impose his own order. He saw in Morgoth a way to achieve his goals of power. From that moment on, he renounced the name Mairon and assumed his new identity as Sauron, which means, the abominable, or the detestable. Association with corruption. Like Morgoth, Sauron sought total dominion over Middle-earth and its creatures, but while Morgoth was more destructive, Sauron preferred manipulation and control. He corrupted lesser beings, such as men and elves, and helped create evil creatures such as orcs and trolls. Sauron during the First Age. During the First Age, Sauron served Morgoth directly as one of his chief lieutenants. He was responsible for commanding the fortress of Angband and, at times, led Morgoth's armies against elves and men. His influence was felt greatly in the battles fought in the lands of Beleriand. Shape-shifting ability. In the First Age, Sauron was a master of illusion and shape-shifting. He assumed many forms, including that of a werewolf and a vampire. These powers of shape-shifting made him an even more feared figure, as he could disguise himself and deceive with ease. Conquest of Tol Sur Ion. One of his most famous acts in the First Age was the conquest of Tol Sur Ion, an elven stronghold. He transformed it into Tol Gorhoth, the Isle of Werewolves, where he ruled tyrannically until he was defeated by the elf Luthien and the human Burin. Despite being temporarily defeated during the First Age, Sauron survived the fall of Morgoth and continued his quest for power. Rise of Sauron after the fall of Morgoth. After Morgoth was defeated and banished to the Outer Void at the end of the First Age, Sauron fled and went into hiding, avoiding capture by the Vala. He briefly repented and offered his surrender, but upon realizing that he would be judged, he returned to corruption and decided to forge his own path as the new Lord of Evil in the Second Age. Second Age, creation of the Rings of Power. During the Second Age, Sauron began working to expand his rule over Middle-earth, initially through seduction and deception. He assumed an attractive and friendly form, introducing himself as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. Under this identity, he managed to gain close ties with the elves of Eregion, especially Celebrimbor, the great elven craftsman, the rings of power. Under the guidance of Sauron, disguised as Anatar, the elves forged the rings of power, jewels of immense power that would give their bearers supernatural abilities. These rings were given to different races, the 7 rings to the dwarves, the 9 rings to men, and the 3 rings were made exclusively by the elves without Sauron's knowledge. The One Ring, secretly, Sauron forged the One Ring in Orodruin, also known as Mount Doom, a ring that would be the most powerful of all and would allow him to control the bearers of the other rings. The One Ring contained much of Sauron's own power, which made him nearly indestructible as long as the ring existed. War with the Elves. When the elves realized that Sauron had deceived them and that the One Ring was being used to control them, they removed their rings, which angered Sauron. This led to a war between Sauron and the elves of Eregion, culminating in the destruction of their land and the death of Celebrimbor. However, Sauron was unable to take the 3 rings from the elves, which limited his control. Ruler of Mordor and the Last Alliance. Sauron eventually settled in Mordor, where he built the fortress of Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower. He began to gather a vast army of orcs, trolls, and other servants of evil, and his influence spread throughout Middle-earth. Conquest of much of Middle-earth. During the Second Age, Sauron conquered large parts of Middle-earth and dominated men, especially those who became the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths, ancient human kings who fell under the control of the One Ring and became Sauron's immortal servants. The Last Alliance, late in the Second Age. Despite being temporarily defeated during the First Age, Sauron survived the fall of Morgoth and continued his quest for power. Rise of Sauron after the fall of Morgoth. After Morgoth was defeated and banished to the Outer Void at the end of the First Age, Sauron fled and went into hiding, avoiding capture by the Vala. He briefly repented and offered his surrender, but upon realizing that he would be judged, he returned to corruption and decided to follow his own path as the new Lord of Evil in the Second Age. Second Age, creation of the Rings of Power. During the Second Age, Sauron began working to expand his rule over Middle-earth, initially through seduction and deception. He assumed an attractive and friendly form, introducing himself as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. Under this identity, he was able to gain close ties with the elves of Eregion, especially Celebrimbor, the great elven craftsman. The Rings of Power. Under the guidance of Sauron, in the guise of Anatar, the elves forged the Rings of Power, jewels of immense power that would grant their wearers supernatural abilities. These rings were given to different races, the 7 rings to the dwarves, the 9 rings to men, and the 3 rings were made exclusively by the elves without Sauron's knowledge. The One Ring. Sauron secretly forged the One Ring in Orodruin, also known as Mount Doom, a ring that would be the most powerful of all and would allow him to control the bearers of the other rings. The One Ring contained much of Sauron's own power, making him nearly indestructible as long as the ring existed. War with the Elves. When the elves realized that Sauron had deceived them and that the One Ring was being used to control them, they removed their rings, which angered Sauron. This led to a war between Sauron and the elves of Eregion, culminating in the destruction of their land and the death of Celebrimbor. However, Sauron was unable to take the 3 rings from the elves, which limited his control. Ruler of Mordor and the Last Alliance. Sauron eventually settled in Mordor, where he built the fortress of Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower. He began to gather a vast army of orcs, trolls, and other servants of evil, and his influence spread throughout Middle-earth. Conquest of much of Middle-earth. During the Second Age, Sauron conquered large parts of Middle-earth and subjugated men, especially those who became the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths, former human kings who fell under the control of the One Ring and became Sauron's immortal servants. The Last Alliance. At the end of the Second Age, the men of Numenor and the elves formed the Last Alliance, led by the human king Elendil and the elf king Gil-galad. They marched against Sauron and managed to defeat him temporarily. Elendil's son Isildur cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand, destroying his physical form but not the ring itself. The loss of the ring, Isildur chose not to destroy the One Ring, which allowed Sauron to continue to exist in a weakened form. His essence was still bound to the ring, and he waited for an opportunity to reclaim it. Third Age, the peril of Sauron and the Lord of the Rings. The Third Age was marked by Sauron's slow return to power. For much of this period, he operated in secret, known only as the Necromancer, settling in the fortress of Dol Guldur in Mirkwood. He began to gather his forces and searched tirelessly for the One Ring, which had been lost. The rise of the Necromancer. Sauron disguised himself as the Necromancer, a dark spirit who corrupted the lands around Dol Guldur. The wise men of Middle-earth, including Gandalf, eventually discovered his true identity, which led to Sauron's expulsion from Dol Guldur by the White Council. However, Sauron returned to Mordor and rebuilt Barad-dûr. Morgoth, also known as Melkor, is the main force of evil in J.R.R.'s Legendary. Tolkien, and his influence permeates the entire mythology of Arda, from creation to the end of the First Age. He is the first and most powerful of corrupted beings, and all of the world's great threats, including Sauron, stem, directly or indirectly, from his evil. In this text, we will explore in detail the origin, power, reign and threat of Morgoth, as well as comparing him with Sauron, his most loyal lieutenant. Origin of Morgoth. Morgoth was originally called Melkor, and he was the most powerful of the Aenir, spiritual beings created by Eru Iluvatar, the creator of all. Melkor belonged to the group of the Vala, the highest beings among the Aenir, who descended to the physical world of Arda to help it be shaped according to the will of Iluvatar. However, Melkor wanted more than any other Vala. He wanted to create and rule on his own, without being subordinate to Iluvatar's plans. Name. The name, Melkor, means, he who rises in power, a title that reflects his ambition to control and shape the world according to his own will. He was the most powerful of all the Vala, with unparalleled strength and wisdom. The music of the Aenir. At the beginning of creation, the Aenir participated in the Great Music, a creative act in which Iluvatar guided them to create the harmony of the universe. Melkor, however, introduced dissonant themes into his portion of the music, attempting to impose his own melody and distort what the other Aenir created. This initial act of rebellion is a symbol of his dissatisfaction with a creation that was not under his control. Melkor's rebellion. Frustrated by not possessing the power to create life like Iluvatar, Melkor began to harbor hatred and jealousy towards the other Vala. He abandoned cooperation with them and began to seek ways to corrupt and dominate everything created. It was from that moment that he took the first steps towards becoming Morgoth, the greatest enemy in the world. The power of Morgoth. Morgoth was the most powerful of all the Vala, and this strength was reflected in his ability to manipulate the elements and beings of the world. Over the course of his reign, he corrupted a vast array of beings and used his monumental strength to cause destruction and spread evil. Strength and influence. Melkor possessed unparalleled power over the elements and the very substance of Arda. He had control over fire, ice, earth and air, being able to create and shape mountains, seas, and continents. His power was so vast that he could distort nature and living creatures, turning beautiful things into monstrous ones, and he infused his evil into the physical world itself. The Balrogs, Morgoth corrupted many of the Maiar, spiritual beings lesser than the Vala, turning them into his loyal servants. Among them, the most powerful were the Balrogs, demons of fire and darkness who served as his lieutenants on the battlefield. They were great instruments of destruction during the wars against elves and men. Creation of orcs and dragons, Morgoth was responsible for creating and corrupting many of Middle-earth's most feared creatures. He twisted the elves he had captured and transformed them into orcs, his terrible combat troops. He also created the first dragons, such as Glorung, who was one of his greatest servants in the destruction of the elven kingdoms. The diminishment of his power. A peculiar characteristic of Morgoth, which sets him apart from his lieutenant Sauron, is that he spread his personal power throughout the world in his effort to corrupt and dominate it. This meant that as time passed, Morgoth weakened even as his influence over Arda increased. He literally infused part of his essence into the physical world, causing permanent corruption in Arda, but at the cost of his original strength. Infusing evil into Arda, the result of this process was that Morgoth's evil remained in the world even after his defeat. Middle-earth itself was corrupted by him, and his presence left scars that were never completely healed, even after his exile. Morgoth's reign. Morgoth's reign occurred primarily in the First Age, and he ruled from his stronghold at Angband in the far north of Middle-earth. During this time, he waged a series of wars against elves and men, and his constant quest for power brought great destruction to the world, the rebellion of the elves and the Silmarils. One of the most significant moments of Morgoth's reign was the theft of the Silmarils, the 3 perfect jewels created by the elf Fëanor. These jewels contained the light of the 2 trees of Valinor, the purest sources of light before the creation of the sun and moon. Morgoth stole the Silmarils and placed them in his iron crown, which he kept in Angband. The theft of the Silmarils sparked the Wars of the Silmarils, in which the elves of Beleriand, led by the sons of Fëanor, waged a centuries-long war to recover the jewels. Morgoth and Sauron, the 2 greatest evil forces in J.R.R. Tolkien's universe, play crucial roles in the fate of Arda and Middle-earth, albeit in different eras. Both are symbols of corruption, destruction, and unbridled ambition, but their natures, methods, and impacts on the world differ significantly. Below, we will conclude our analysis of these 2 characters in detail, comparing their origins, power, reigns, and threats. The power of Morgoth. Morgoth was superior to any other being in Tolkien's universe in terms of raw strength. He could warp the earth itself, shape mountains and seas, and create evil beings such as orcs, Balrogs, and the first dragons. His ability to corrupt was unmatched, for he transformed the beautiful and pure into something twisted and evil. However, Morgoth dissipated much of his power by infusing it into the world itself, attempting to bend reality to his will. This weakened his personal power over time, but left a legacy of evil embedded in the very fabric of Arda that would continue to plague generations after his fall. However, despite being the most powerful of the Vala, Morgoth was ultimately defeated in the War of Wrath, a monumental war waged by the Vala at the end of the First Age. He was captured and exiled to the Outer Void, but his evil continued to influence the world through his servants and the scars he left on Arda. Sauron, the master of manipulation. Sauron was Morgoth's most loyal lieutenant, but unlike his master, Sauron was more resourceful, preferring indirect control and manipulation over sheer brute force. Final conclusion. Morgoth is the source of all evil in Tolkien's universe. He is the archetype of chaos, corruption, and destruction, whose influence extends throughout the history of Arda. He shaped the world in his image of chaos and ruin, and his ambition to corrupt divine creation left lasting scars. However, his dissipation of power in the world itself weakened him and resulted in his eventual defeat by the Vala.